And welcome to the 11th edition of the Bocas Lit Fest. Listen, you have to be excited about this because today we're going to be looking at the big idea, the way forward for the Caribbean, especially kind of after COVID-19. Just what does it mean? What is this big idea that we need to figure out to move the Caribbean forward? Well, don't worry, this morning we have all the experts with us to talk about it. We do have Professor John Agard with us. We have Dr. Justin Ram, who is an economist, and Anthony Sabga, director of the largest conglomerate in the region. And all of them are here to share with us in the discussion about how we can move the Caribbean forward, whether it's sustainable development and climate change, whether it's leadership and civil society, and of course, we want to look at economy and trade. So all of this coming up in the program. We're here with you from 10:30 until 12. I am Natalee Legore. I am just the moderator for today, but of course, you can see our guests on screen who are raring and ready to go. But before we get to them, let us look at what some of the voices across the region have to say about the big idea and the way forward for the Caribbean. Here is Janelle. I'm not seeing the names up there. I think it's a little bit too high, Nicholas. We do have our technical team in the back helping us here. So we do have Nicholas and Alana to help us. We have three young leaders here with us to talk to us about what's happening in the Caribbean. So let's go to that video with them.
Hello, my name is Janelle Clark and I'm from Barbados. I'm currently based in Geneva, where I work as the advisor to the executive director at the International Trade Center. I'm very happy to be here today at the Bocas Lit Fest virtually and to contribute to this discussion on what post-COVID recovery could look like and what we hope for. The pandemic has laid bare our vulnerabilities and weaknesses within our global economy, but has also presented us with an opportunity to figure out how we can grow and improve in ways that are much more equitable and can be much more accessible. We saw that the pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on women, which is also concerning when we consider the fact that women are primary caregivers in the household and they take on the bulk of unpaid care work. And to be sure, the work within the productive sectors of the economy are dependent upon this unseen, unpaid care work that is in the core economy. And when we also consider the fact that where these sources of income dry up for women, this has a very direct impact on the social welfare of the communities that these women support. We know that women's economic empowerment has a very direct relationship to economic transformation, and yet within the Caribbean, women's levels of entrepreneurship and women-owned businesses are still much lower than their male counterparts. They still face barriers to entry, barriers to trade, and just difficulties with regards to access to financing. So there's still a very uneven playing field when it comes to this. Yet we know that if we invest in gender equality globally, we could add 13 trillion to the economy by 2030. It tells us then that we need to think of how we can mainstream gender inclusivity and women's economic empowerment within the post-COVID recovery plans, not as an afterthought, but at the very beginning, to make sure that these existing gender gaps do not continue in the future. So my question to the panel is, how can we make sure that the post-COVID recovery is much more gender inclusive? And what measures would you look at first to make sure that women's economic empowerment is mainstreamed from the very beginning?
Hi, my name is Marika Dookie, born in Trinidad and Tobago and raised in St. Martin on the Dutch side. I would like to first start off by thanking all the organizers of the Bocas Lit Festival in having me here today, and also to the panelists who join in on these discussions about our ideas about the future of the Caribbean region. A little bit of background about myself. I'm an education development consultant, focusing on strengthening education systems, especially to meet the demands of the changing world. I definitely promote the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, especially education for sustainable development, which I also find is not being um, sufficiently addressed across the region. And so for that, I'm trying to build capacity in these areas. Um, some of the work I've done, for instance, in St. Martin, involved disaster risk reduction work, recovery efforts with UNICEF Netherlands in St. Martin after the devastation of Hurricane Irma in 2017. I also worked with the Ministry of Justice to sort of strengthen the education program a bit for the juvenile adolescents. And of course, I've done lots of community work, volunteering my time, building projects where we enhance our capacity in different areas on St. Martin, social livelihoods, protecting and safeguarding those, as well as I'm on the board of environmental protection in the Caribbean. And we focus on research, restoration, education, and advocacy in the Caribbean region. Um, so a lot of my work spans focusing on education and the environmental sector where climate change is concerned, especially. And so a few concerns that I have for the Caribbean region would involve, for instance, and my heart goes out to St. Vincent and the Grenadines and all the lives that are being sort of displaced due to evacuations with the volcano. But for me, it's this moment that we're experiencing now through St. Vincent and the Grenadines also highlights the fact that the Caribbean region is definitely at the forefront of drastic climate changes where we're going to have stronger weather patterns and it's sort of we're prone to have that natural disaster you know future and I think about it and it pains me to know that we can start talking about climate refugees and people from the Caribbean being displaced instead of people coming to the Caribbean and enjoying it's to think that this is the future that we're projecting forward. um, it's in my best interest and everyone to sort of find ways to preserve the lifestyle that we have here, but in doing so, creating sustainable solutions that is going to really reap the benefits for the generations to come. And so I find that there's not a lot of talk about mental health services, for instance, especially after experiencing Hurricane Irma and seeing trauma firsthand, experiencing it myself. I feel as though that mental health services, psychosocial support, of course, during the disaster and after post-disaster, these things are very important for the longevity of the people in the Caribbean, especially being that we're going to be experiencing such drastic patterns that really can disrupt how we interact with our environment out here. And so for our everyday lives, it's important that we really focus on mental health and strengthen those services. So that's one area that I really would love to see, expressed a little bit more out in the region. Um, Another area that I find very important is for capacity building and also just collaboration. Not until UNICEF came in to support the government in focusing on child protection services as well as preparing schools for disasters. You don't realize the importance of getting that outside help and that knowledge sharing moment where you can have the support to build and strengthen your systems and then create better systems for the future. And so I really want to point out that it's important for us to have further collaboration. The Caribbean is very strong together, and we really care about one another. But I do know that we need to have more access to finance for climate funds. We need to really come together as one and support one another even further. And I'm hoping that I can see more opportunities of other parts of the world supporting the Caribbean and each other. It's not just we take support, but it's also we all support one another as we foster more sustainable solutions going further.
Growing up, we often hear youth described as the future, the hope of a nation, even a blessing. I've even seen some writers liken youth to the lifeblood of a nation. Following that train of thought, it only stands to reason that the Caribbean region should be full of hope and vigor, especially given the fact that it's one of the younger regions of the world. Unfortunately, that hope quickly becomes anxiety when one realizes that the region has a high level of brain drain. As a young person, I often wonder if the Caribbean will continue to be an environment that lacks opportunity for youth, an environment that appears to limit the potential of anyone that grows up here. The question many young people have on their hearts and minds is, do I have a future here? And while there isn't a simple solution to that problem, it's clear that the region needs to create more opportunities for young people, especially those in STEM fields. Many young professionals simply don't see themselves having a future here. We see fast developing or even developed industries in STEM fields overseas. We see attractive salaries too. In comparison, we see that many Caribbean countries have failed to develop a productive tech sector or make major advancements in STEM fields. Additionally, the world is moving to a freelance and gig economy. E-commerce has taken center stage. Unfortunately, for much of the region, e-commerce is notoriously difficult. Sometimes it's a lack of infrastructure, as many international payment platforms are unavailable in the Caribbean, and the local alternatives are either non-existent or they lack the adoption, functionality, or the legal framework to support their use. Local information and telecommunications infrastructure in some countries already limits the practicality and penetration of many digital payment platforms. Young entrepreneurs who wish to succeed in the digital space are also met with big bank fees and red tape, which prevents many of their ideas from ever taking off. This is exacerbated by the lack of regional economic cooperation. And just like we hear with youth, we always hear about the great potential in building ties and economic relations within the region. However, actionable policy continues to be lost at sea, and political will appears to be on vacation at the beach. As a young person, I find it incredibly ironic that a Caribbean region described as a leader in global finance has such an anachronistic financial sector. Finally, beyond the issues that I've already mentioned is one that many would put at the top of the list, and that is mental health. We can see that most mental health patients in the Caribbean don't receive adequate treatment or counseling. And poverty, unemployment, instability, and discrimination are issues that many young people across the region face. Sadly, these issues are some of the leading risk factors for depression. Few speak up for fear of being labeled crazy. And for many persons, there's a tendency to assume that someone suffering from a mental health issue is a violent threat. And while people continue to suffer in silence, the number of people with mental disorders in the Caribbean is projected to increase in the future. If nothing changes, most of these people will also have limited access to mental health care. Many of these sufferers are young people. They won't be able to live full and creative lives if the current situation persists. Policymakers need to recognize mental health as a priority, a matter for study and urgent action. These are some of the anxieties that I have for the future. My only hope is that the young people of today can enjoy a region where they have the room and opportunity to truly be the lifeblood and vigor of the Caribbean region.
And you just heard from Janelle Clark, Marika Duki, and of course, Omari Joseph. And I think one thing is definitely consistent from what we've heard from the young people is that we need a lot more opportunities. We have to address gender inequality, especially where COVID is concerned and how women are affected as a result of the pandemic. And of course, sustainable development through education. But I think the theme through all of this is how does the Caribbean move forward as a bloc, and where are the opportunities? Where do they come from? How do we address the political will? Or as Omari spoke about, where's the actionable policy? So gentlemen, I think we have a lot to talk about this morning. So let's just see if we can address a little bit, what the young people brought to the fore. Let's start with Janelle. Janelle was talking about how, the pandemic has affected women more than men, and, we need to invest in gender equality. What are some of the changes you think we have to make right now so that we can address this right across the region? Because we have seen it. We have seen that a lot of places that are closed, that are restricted, we have a lot of women in these sectors. So what can we do to treat with that immediately?
I saw John put his hand up.
Okay, I'm
So
being
let him
very
go first.
polite. Be very polite. But this is a really big issue, and I'm glad that Janelle brought this matter up, because it's something that I've been talking about with others in the UN and heard from more than 200 governments. It is one of the Sustainable Development Goals. That is Sustainable Development Goal number 5 is gender equality. So this is a big issue globally. And one of the things that was mentioned was, related to how to promote equality for women, for example, in business. Because the United Nations statistics indicate that a woman, compared to a man, a woman receives about 70 to 90 cents compared to a man getting $1. And this is really improper and needs to be changed. You're disadvantaged simply because of gender, not because of skills. And there is, we have to encourage also a safe environment for reporting discriminatory sexual harassment and so forth. So in each business, and I don't know, Anthony could address this, encourage committees empowered to investigate such complaints, okay? And other, issues that need to be done, provide comprehensive training to all employees to indicate about, they can't make comments that put you down because you're female and so forth, bias related, and to be fair in employee recruitment. Because there are studies that have been done that indicate that including women in management increases 2.5% increase in innovation revenue by 1%. This was from the Boston Consulting Group. And also when you're hiring people, for example, you want to have a lorry driver, and you can't say women need not apply because you want a man. All of that is improper. And these are some of the changes that need to be made. So I will stop at that, going forward. These are practical measures.
Well, Anthony, you run one of the largest conglomerates across the region, so I'm sure you've had plenty of experience treating with women. But as we're talking about in the pandemic and the gender inequality, how do we get that gender inclusivity, especially now, right now, where we're seeing more women displaced by the pandemic in the workplace than men?
Look, I could only comment from my vantage point of our organization. And we have a cadre of very powerful women across the entire strata of the organization, from strong women who work on production lines, and you know who you are, and also leaders who are at the highest level of the organization. I mean, our C-suite has 2 women as senior leaders of the Ansa Makar group. And even within the core corporate leadership team, I would say there's far more women that work in here than men. So this organization has and amongst its leadership team, many women, and that comes from sort of employment practices and empowerment practices. I'm also proud to acknowledge that as an organization, we ensure that the right sort of workplace discipline and policies get put in place. And our leadership, we have a female actually who's our head of HR director head, and she's driven a lot of these policies, and it's been supported by our board and senior management to protect women in the workplace. And so it's something that within our purview, we do what it is that we can do across our jurisdictions. It's something we don't play with, but it's also something we recognize that it brings that level of productivity that John is referring to. But I think it goes beyond that. I think we have a grassroots challenge across the region where, you know, women struggle by sort of the nature of our culture. And I was very proud to see very recently, you know, Brand Stag, which is, you know, some of you may or may not know, is the man's bear. And the man's bear taking a very bold and powerful position, which, look, has been celebrated. It's controversial, but against female, you know, violence, gender-based violence and violence towards women. And quite proud of the team. You know, they stepped out of their crease. It's not something that, you know, a bear brand would traditionally do, but the conversation is a real and much needed one. So I encourage others to take it on. You know, when there's a need, you got to step up and do what it is that you need to do.
And Justin, what are your thoughts? As I said, what can we do at this point to get that gender inclusivity, especially post-COVID recovery, so that women aren't as affected or disproportionately affected by the pandemic and the effects of it?
Thanks, Natalie. I mean, I just want to say one thing before I get into how we deal with gender equality, but we have to remember that COVID-19 was also very much a medical emergency. And when you look at deaths from COVID, generally it has impacted men more than women. So I think we need to also bring that balance to the conversation as well. More men have died of COVID than of women. The issue that Janelle has raised is an issue that has been happening within society even beyond COVID-19. It's been happening way before, and it's something that we need to deal with greater urgency. I think that in the Caribbean, and I think recently, I used to work at the Caribbean Development Bank up to a year ago, and I've heard a lot of very good articulation, very, very lovely plans about what we need to do to ensure that there's gender equality. But Natalie, the problem that we have in the region is that we talk a good talk. We talk a good talk, but we just cannot implement. And the issue here for me is that I am tired of hearing of talk. I want to see implementation.
Yeah.
What do we need to do to ensure that women are mainstreamed into every decision that we are making? We are at that point in time that every decision that our government makes, we need to be looking at that through a gender lens. So what does that mean? Okay, if a simple thing, if I am building a road in a community, can I ensure that that road is also safe enough so that women feel safe to walk along that road? So I'm not just putting up a road. I have to ensure that I'm putting up a road with proper sidewalks, with proper street lighting. I have to think it through properly. And I think what the issue here is that we talk it, but we're not thinking it through properly. These are the things that have to happen. With respect to women earning less in the workplace, a lot of that is down to inadequate childcare. When a woman becomes a mother, many times a lot of that childcare responsibility falls on her. And so what happens is that she can't work as many hours in the office, for example, as a man could. And so that impacts things like the ability to move up in the organization. So there are things like this as a society we also have to look at and deal with. Can we help our women by providing reasonable and affordable childcare so that they can have the same level of opportunities that men have? But Natalie, I just want to say to you.
Justin, I'm happy you raised that point, because I think especially since COVID, we've seen where, you know, when workers were asked to come back out to work on their proper rotation, their time, and the children being at home for homeschooling, we ended up with a crisis on our hands because parents just didn't know what to do with daycares closed. You know, you have to be out at work, the children being, you know, having school online. We just ended up with a real crisis on our hands because parents now had to determine how to balance being a parent and being able to be in that breadwinner or that earner, you know. And so I don't think we've even worked that out as yet. We are having problems, you know. So, and you spoke about men, you know, being, you know, disproportionately affected by COVID through death, as you know. And it brought me to the point that even Omari and Marika raised about mental health. And how do we treat with mental health across the region? How do we address this? And we've been talking about lockdown fatigue. We've been talking about, how people are coping with being in the pandemic, not being able to socialize as much as you'd normally do, not being able to spend time with your family and friends, and just how do we cope. So let's just touch a bit on this mental health and what we can do to ensure that if somebody needs that kind of help, they don't feel as if, okay, it's wrong for me to ask for it, that they don't feel stigmatized or discriminated to say, listen, this thing is affecting me, and I really need some help right now. And it's something that somehow right across the Caribbean region, we seem ashamed to talk about the fact that we suffer from mental health.
Maybe if I kick off on this here, Natalie, I think it's a really great topic. When you think about the amount of natural disasters that Caribbean countries have suffered, I mean, I live in Barbados now. I'm a Trinidadian, but I live in Barbados. And two weekends ago, I experienced a volcanic ashfall from La Soufre in St. Vincent. And I can tell you, Natalie, that had a tremendous impact on me. I mean, I was not prepared. I don't think anybody in Barbados was quite prepared for what we
Yeah.
saw. And it had this real impact. So we have a lot of, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm fairly resilient. I can get through this. But think about people who have gone through trauma after trauma after trauma. We have a lot of psychosocial people who have been damaged by this, and we're not doing enough. And what I have found, Natalie, is that sometimes I would create WhatsApp groups, and sometimes I just asking people how are you doing, and people then write back to me individually and say, I'm so happy that you reached out. This is impacting me far more than I ever thought it would. And so I
Yeah.
realized that we need to have that sort of ability to have that conversation. And people want to have the conversation, but they're just afraid to have it in the open. And why is that? I think we
But
need to
what do we
find
do
some
though?
ways.
Because we know the issue. We know that we have these natural disasters, whether it's hurricanes, earthquake, volcanic eruptions. It may just even be tropical storms, but we have these things that we constantly have to address and have to face. But as the Caribbean, what can we do even through CARICOM to say, okay, let us deal with mental health? Because obviously we have enough on our plates, whether it's unemployment, poverty, natural disasters. We have enough on our plates to get us to that point where we need that kind of psychological support. But as a bloc, what can we do and how do we do it? And everybody, feel free to jump in. I mean,
Yeah,
this is an
look, I
open
think,
discussion.
I think campaigns of destigmatization is one approach. This is not an area that is my field or expertise or one that I could comment on completely, but creating space and ensuring that people are accommodated. You check in with those under and within your care, and do so periodically is important. And also publicly and directionally providing that support. So in our group, we provide an employee assistance program where anyone could, for free, anything that they need to confidentially, no one's check-in, no report comes to me, no report comes to anyone, but you have this facility that if you need to talk to someone, it's available for you to talk to. This is not whistleblowing stuff. This is just to help you talk through what it is that you need. Now, is that something, and I don't want to be sort of maybe shaking it up a little bit, but maybe that's what it calls for. Is it that as an organization, and you start to put policies across the region, that all organizations at a certain size and scale need to make this thing available? Or is it that governments provide this thing to its public sector and say, hey, look, have a call? I mean, I remember, in school, there were suicide hotlines, and in the at the time, I think it was Telco or TSTT phone box. You had your phone card, and those things would have been free, so you didn't need to top up your card to do it. Are there ways that maybe the telecoms could provide this, and then there are call centers where social workers who are trained in this regard? Because I hear what you're saying. Justin, we could provide that support amongst ourselves to who we know and who we care for. But sometimes this thing needs a learned mind that could extract what needs to be, proficiently extracted and be able to direct and treat accordingly. But, we're dealing
Nicola,
with...
Anthony, I think that's
Yeah.
part of the problem, though, is that over the years, we've seen organizations do what they can, but there isn't this holistic approach to it. It's not something that's right across the board. So you'll find one organization where those members can get help, but you move from that organization to another, and there's just absolutely nothing in place, which is why I'm talking about CARICOM, how from a policy position, from an integrated position, what is it that we need to put on the table so that we can ensure that regardless of what island you're from, regardless of what organization you're a part of, you can get that psychosocial help, that psychological help, because mental illness is real, and a lot of us at different levels suffer from it.
Yeah, look, Natalie, I want to say this. I think, and I think at some point in this conversation, I would like to, we could explore the conversation of the functioning or the dysfunctioning of CARICOM and its structures. I think that's a real issue that that could be debated. But I think there's another issue here, and we're dealing with sort of the symptoms and how we treat the symptoms. But I think we need to come down to the cause, and I hold a sort of a broad view that a deep part of the challenge in the region is the degradation and almost disappearance in many places of the institution of family. Because your family is where you go to for the love and care, and it's where there's a dysfunction or a destruction of that fabric is where I think these mental issues sort of occur. Yeah, look, we live in a world of hyper anxiety. I mean, I wonder if our ancestors dealt with, I guess they dealt with something different, war and, saber-toothed tigers chasing them and whatnot. But we've been dealing with all sorts of forms of natural disasters, and it just keeps coming at you, and then pandemics, and we're inventing all kinds of new things to freak ourselves out, But it's that fabric of family and the coming together of family. And in many places, this pandemic has reinstituted family, reinstituted a deep level of faith, because those things that you were relying on, all of a sudden, that world that you sort of illusionary world that we create around ourselves doesn't exist. And for some, that creates a huge fracas and a volcano in of itself. And for others, it recentered. So, and it's the institution of family, I think, that could wrap its arms around that.
Yeah.
And
I think that institute, yes, go ahead. It's John just spoke.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
There are some countries have solved this problem, particularly in the Scandinavian countries, in which they have instituted, and follow up on policies and laws and stuff like this, making certain things mandatory. So the problem is when people do the wrong thing, there are no consequences. Okay, we could talk about this in a lovely academic way, but if there are no consequences, everybody could do what they want. That's an overriding problem that we have, where we create a policy. So CARICOM has a policy, some countries have laws and they don't enforce the laws. People don't even enforce their own policy. Okay, all they tick off in the box is that we have a policy and we have a law, but they don't enforce it. So it doesn't bring about the transformative change. I think Justin has alluded to that as well. The action to change things, the way that things are done, and to change people's behavior. So
we're talking about no consequences, lack of proper family structures, and also probably bad leadership.
Bad leadership is a critical issue. There are some deep cultural issues across the Caribbean, I'm afraid, with regard to this matter. About being in charge and the rest of you should shut up. Okay, we in charge and we could do whatever it is we want. That's part of the culture that came out of the colonial era, in fact. And the surprise is that when your own people do that to their own people, they haven't learned anything, really and truly.
But isn't it ironic, though, that the same thing Isn't it ironic that the same thing that we complain about, slave masters and master days and what master want to do, is that it's the same things we implement. We have the same kind of mentality and we approach things that way.
Yes, that's exactly the underlying problem, the deep underlying problem. Okay, and that is part of what has seeped into politics. The kind of I am in charge and I could do whatever I want, and I can enhance me and my own and stuff, and my party members and my own little clan, and everybody else gets nothing. So that is part of what we need to be very insistent on changing. In the modern era, of course, there are new tools. That's the media, and you can go on Facebook, Instagram, etc., and you could reach people. This is part of the new game of people showing advocacy. The issue we spoke about before with regard to gender equality and stuff. Don't keep don't keep quiet. You have to shout, and insist and so
Yeah.
forth that there's equality and stuff. If you keep quiet,
But you know
then
what?
yeah.
You know what, John, while I hear your point on, new media and the role that it can play, is that new media has also taken us down, in my mind, a dark, deep path, because now you have more people with propaganda, misinformation, false information, and all of that is in front of you. And now you have to decipher between what's real and what's false. And a lot of people don't take the time to do that. We have this idea of just running with it, just run.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, that's part of the new problem, and of course, now that we're in COVID-19, it's gotten worse because everybody is communicating online, okay, not face to
Yeah.
face, right? So it's gotten worse, and those who know how to exploit that are using that as one of their new tools. But anyway, my main point is really and truly we have to go to action and enforce policies and enforce laws and stuff. Not leave it is that you could do it if you want, because that is really not what's not working. In fact, enforcement.
All right, gentlemen,
Consequences.
let us talk about that. Let us talk about that, because right across the Caribbean region, in my mind, we do have a lot of laws. We have a lot of policies. We tried the whole CARICOM, the CSME. We do put things in place, but somehow, regardless of what we've put on paper, as you said, we don't follow through. The enforcement is not necessarily there, and consequences seem to be absent, just non-existent. So maybe the conversation has to be about, how do we get there? How do we move from putting something on paper to actually having it implemented, and to know that if it isn't, there are consequences to our actions?
Natalie, I'll say something on this here. I think the major challenge that we have now in the Caribbean is that we need to think about a new social contract between the people and government. I think personally that governments have become much too bloated, and I think are simply out of control. And the reason for that is that we have a bias in our minds, and this is not only in the Caribbean but across the world, that we think to deal with any problem means that we must add on to it. We already know that our governments are not working for us and not doing things, but the solution always seems to be let's form another department to deal with that, when it absolutely does not work. What I think we really do need now is a proper partnership between private sector and the public sector. That is how we're going to get things done. There are things that the private sector, they know how to implement. For example, let's think about what has happened at the CARICOM level with respect to the implementation of the Caribbean single market and economy. Decisions are taken by heads of government. Often, more often than not, the people don't even know what those decisions are. We are not informed. So first of all, we need to deal with communication at a much better level. But when those decisions are taken, we have found that governments are unable to implement them at the national level. Why is that? Because we simply don't know how to implement well. What we need to do is to say, well, why not form a partnership with the chambers of commerce within the various countries and let us work together on implementing this so that we get the good private sector notion of implementation alongside the public sector working on this. So I'm saying here, Natalie, we have to completely change our social contract with governments. I think we need less rather than more, and we need our governments to work more efficiently with the private sector to help us move along,
Yeah.
because we can't continue along this
And
path that we have been going along.
I'll start with Anthony on this because we saw recently right here in Trinidad and Tobago where this whole idea of public-private partnership for vaccines, which are so critical at this time, didn't seem to work, or there was so much noise around it that at this point I don't even know if the population knows how that partnership is going. But it brings me to the point that we talk about year after year after year, especially in last year's budget presentation, about the ease of doing business, the ease for the private sector to be able to help, for the government to put that enabling environment in place so that the private sector can do what it needs to do. And we hear all the time in Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica is a lot better when it comes on to the ease of doing business. But, we hear that, it's so difficult. It's so difficult to get an idea out, to put things into place. So Anthony, talk to us about that. How do we fix this ease of doing business, even though we heard from the Minister of Finance in his budget presentation that they're trying to digitize the economy, they're trying to do certain things so that, things can work out better. But between October to now, has there been any change whatsoever?
With respect to from October till now, sorry, Natalie, I didn't catch that. Has there been any change with respect to what
No, I was
specifically?
just asking, I was just saying that, no, I was just saying that we speak a lot about, since we're here talking, and, Justin raised the point that we need a new social contract between the people and government, and we need to look at public-private partnerships to get things going and, be able to communicate effectively what we're doing. I think those are the three salient points that he raised, but I'm saying, in October, we heard the government address that through its budget presentation, that the ease of doing business, they're trying to sort that out, trying to digitize the economy, put things in place so that, it's so easy to make payments online, which was one of the things that Omari Joseph mentioned, that, that digital footprint is just not there for you to capture certain things and do certain things. So I'm asking you, between October to now, this idea of the ease of doing business so that we can have the government provides the enabling environment, the private sector can come in and do what it needs to do. Have we had any change between October to now?
But allow me to take the question maybe in a different angle, Natalie, because I think what Justin has raised is so critical and so important, and there's some stuff I want to share. I had the distinct privilege of attending CARICOM heads of government meeting on the invitation of CARICOM, but for and on behalf of the to be formed and now formed Caribbean private sector organization. So the Caribbean private sector organization is Apex. I think I've frozen. Am I being heard or?
I'm hearing you. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, no, the image seems to have frozen. But the Caribbean private sector organization is sort of the apex private sector organization, which will seek to align and filter and work alongside all of the other private sector organizations in the screen has gone black, guys, as I'm seeing
all right, I think I'm seeing it back up.
Yeah, I'm hearing you. It's just that we all look frozen. So
I'm hearing you, Anthony.
So we can go ahead, right? Okay, let's keep going.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so proud to share that the CPSO actually has a seat at the CARICOM table, which is a huge move and could only sort of augur well to the advancement of that agenda and that collaborative. And I may be living in a fantasy world where that may or may not materialize, but I think the move is in the general right direction. What concerns me is the speed at which, when one considers what was the concept, the catalyst of forming CARICOM and what they called it previously, and where it is today, regrettably, I think it's largely failed in that agenda. We haven't really brought the islands together. I think we've got, too many currencies in this thing. Each currency, none of them trade against each other. So we end up with a very sort of challenging thing. And what I was present to in attending that CARICOM meeting was that there's 15 member states. There was a room with a lot of people in it, and as a result, I think it's very difficult to get anything done. And so they face a challenge in and of themselves. And as a region, trying to, for all intents and purposes, trying to garner the brightest and the best of 15 leaders and then sub leaders for each of those institutions. You're looking for a lot of talent, and this is not a lot of people in this region. So in and of that regard, we set ourselves up for a deep challenge. So I think it's within that CARICOM struggles to function. And each of these leaders have their own agendas at play, and as such, they're filtering down and they're filtering through. It takes time because, they gather and they talk as one, but they're not really held together by one. Jamaica has its own dollar, Barbados have its own dollar, Trinidad have its own dollar, the EC, Eastern Caribbean have their own dollar, and that functions great because no one man or one entity could touch it. You've got to talk to 10 people, and there's a level of stability around it.
But look at that. EC was able to do it. So why can't we mimic it right across CARICOM, 15 member states? And I mean, maybe we always talk about the United States, but maybe that's a good model where we can see, you have the different states and you have the federal government, so that each person
But is it a good model? Does the US function well as a federation? Does the European Union? They've all struggled with it. They all continue to struggle with it.
But when you compare what we have to what they have, we haven't made any moves. It's one thing to struggle, but it's one thing not to get off the ground.
Yeah.
It's disappointing. The inertia is certainly disappointing, but we are dealing with a generational change, I would think, and bringing in that new leadership in the region emerging at a time where there is digitization, and in digitization, the democratization of money, and when you look at sort of the cryptographic and the blockchain technology and what that's going to be able to bring. And in fact, as a region, given our small footprint, there are ways that you could juxtapose where you're at now and find ways to sort of integrate it in a particular way. But the political will to sort of relinquish its power and control, I think, is not something that, it's not something that I think would be hard. But simple things like, look, one stock exchange with one set of rules. It's not difficult, it's not impossible. It's just, it just requires the will to get it done. And I think people will get it done. Someone will come with the technology. They just got to navigate the nuances of all these particular sort of archaic structures and archaic laws. But if we as a region actually and genuinely empower CARICOM to do what it needs to do, what it's set up to do, this thing happens in a far more rapid manner. It's just that the leaders that are entrusted with being present at there, they themselves have to figure out, how do I navigate, 15 people have to agree on everything. And at some point they need to surrender, okay, look, this component of my power needs to be surrendered or delegated in a faithful manner. And there needs to be a level of confidence and faith in order for that to happen. And
well, gentlemen, let us talk about that. Let's talk about this leadership that is so critical and needed right across the Caribbean, so that CARICOM can work, so that we can organize as a bloc and get things done as a region. But how do we get there? Because as you said, John spoke about, the fact that we have this massa days mentality where we're still kind of implementing that kind of colonial aspect of things, just in talking about wanting that new social contract between the people and heads of government, because we have a kind of think that it's about us as compared to it's about the people. And then you're here talking to us about that leadership where people have to be able to give and to kind of put themselves on the back burner so that the bloc can move as a region. But you also talk, Anthony, about how long CARICOM has been around and the time that it's taking us to implement things. So what's going to change? Because in my mind, we've always had transformational leaders. We've always had transitional leaders, but somehow haven't been able to get that to see a CARICOM where we can operate and move forward.
Let me ask this question, right? This was something that was very interesting for me coming out of the Caribbean and having made an investment in North America in Cape Canaveral, which is where, SpaceX launched all the rockets and whatnot from. One of the largest cruise ship terminals in the United States, where all these large cruise ships actually come down to our region, people actually get on there. And we hosted an event and invited various members of the municipality and the chief of fire, and all these people attended. And the guy who looks after the port there was in the tap room and having a beer, and I was chatting to this guy, and he said something to me that just blew my mind. He said that he was an elected executive. I said, what do you mean? He says, well, look, because the port is so important to Cape Canaveral, the people of this municipality, town, I don't know what they call it, they actually elect who looks after it. Let's ask ourselves, a very broad question. Yes, we elected, Mia Mottley, the Barbadians elected Mia Mottley, the Trinidadians elected Keith Rowley, the Jamaicans, Holness, and we could go on and on and on. But no one elected anyone at the CARICOM level. Have any of these people faced and had to sell us as a region on, look, this is what, choose me, and this is the leadership that I will bring? Where is that, where is that possibility? I'm humbled by, and also prayerful, because I understand that I'm actually on this talk today because the head of CARICOM, who unfortunately still can't get a positive result, and I know how challenging this is. We've had an executive, the executive who runs our US business. I think it took him 2 months to get a negative COVID test. He could come back to the office. So very prayerful, but let's not lose sight of the fact that the head of CARICOM is down with COVID, right? And as a region, we still can't seem to come together and coordinate to get economies of scale and get the buying power to buy enough vaccines to rid ourselves of this situation, to be able to, bring back in tourism. I mean, imagine, I know people are going to jump out of their skin if they can't get Carnival 2022. I mean, people just lose their mind. They're going to go bananas. We need to solve this, and we need to solve it fast. So,
yeah. So it comes down to leadership again. But that's an interesting point you raised, that we don't elect, who the head of CARICOM is going to be and the executive, but that we select them. So, gentlemen, John, Justin, do you think it's time for that process? And do you think it can be that catalyst that we need to get CARICOM to start moving forward?
Can I just make a comment on this? Because you remember there was an attempt many decades ago to have a Caribbean Federation, and that didn't work, in fact. So that is part of the reason why we're still operating in silos. Everybody doing what's best for them and not working together as a group. That's one of the key underlying issues. How to change that, and essentially to get everybody to work together in the best interest of the region. And also the problems that CARICOM itself has in trying to make that happen. As Justin indicated, talk. What about the action is the underlying problem. And part of what we need to discuss is how to change that, how to bring about the transformative change required for action, because we have to change our thinking. Our thinking, as we indicated earlier, still sounds colonial, of everybody acting on their own behalf and not working together as a group. And as was discussed earlier about the private sector, the public and the government working together in the best interest of the country as a whole, seems to be an underlying issue that has come out of the culture in the region of, as you indicated earlier, when there was a massa, massa used to tell you, you don't do any thinking. Okay, I will make all the decisions. And we still seem to have that embedded and really need to change this. And so the advocacy of the public and the private sector is quite critical in changing that. And maybe we need to discuss some practical measures of how to make this happen, in fact. Hand over to maybe Justin
Yeah,
wants to make a comment.
Justin.
Well, yeah, well, Natalie, I will come back to the point, and I'll say it, and just to reemphasize what John just said, I think we just need to have this new contract between leadership, government, and the people. We need to make it very clear what government is supposed to be doing and what government isn't supposed to be doing, and then I want to make this point around and coming back to Anthony's. Do you know that I think within the next month there's supposed to be an election for a new Secretary General of CARICOM? I don't think many people around around the region know this.
Are aware of that.
This information
But
should be made.
who votes for that position? The heads of government select.
Yes, the heads of government.
So it's an appointed position.
It's an appointed position, and so governments have the right to put forward a candidate. But I think Anthony makes a great point here that that shouldn't be the way that it works. It's too important a role for us to be unappointed. It should be something that maybe is elected, so that we can have a certain level of accountability every few years when that person has to come around and tell us what have they achieved or what have they not achieved, for example. That would also mean that when the heads of government meet, that person also has skin in the game to make sure that things happen. So that that person isn't just a pencil pusher, for example, saying, okay, the heads have taken this decision, I'll send out this communique. Whoever reads it, it really doesn't matter to me because I'll still get my salary at the end of the month. That has to stop.
Right.
And so it
And
comes
that's why
back to
when we
that
have
point.
these,
The governance needs to change within the region.
and that's why when we have even these CARICOM heads of government meeting, they put out what they want. So sometimes even things that you're interested in, you just miss. And not only that, as you said, which one of you raised the idea of consequences? I mean, it's implemented, it's not implemented, doesn't seem to matter because each country is doing its own thing. But gentlemen, let us talk a little bit about this idea of sustainable development, climate change, because we're seeing here in the Caribbean where things are definitely changing. I think it was Grenada, Puerto Rico, Cuba, recorded last year some of the highest temperatures that they ever did. You know, we're seeing the sea levels rising. We see the amount of tropical storms and hurricanes that we've been experiencing. And all of these are things that affect us as a region, not just as individual countries, as a region, and how do we address them? So let's just talk a little bit about that. This whole idea of sustainable development, what it really means, because it's a terminology that we use all the time. What it really means. What does it really mean, gentlemen?
Can I just start off on this? Because this has been a big issue in which I have been questioned by, all of the governments and stuff, but virtually. So I have some idea of what their issues are. So I'm just going to just give you a little bit of a prelude that when in 2015, I think it was, that the Sustainable Development Goals were debated in the UN, people said 17 Sustainable Development Goals is too much. It should be reduced to 5 or 6. We can't do all of that. And after they argued between all the various countries, they decided 17 Sustainable Development Goals was the world that they wanted. Starting from no poverty, number 1, going up to partnerships, number 17, including things like gender equality and some of the issues that others of the young people brought up, like Marika Duki brought up the issues of climate action and life below water and life on land, SDG 13, 14, and 15. And Omari Joseph also brought up the matter of the brain drain and having a future and so forth. So one of the SDGs was decent work and economic growth. Falling within what he was worried about and the mental health issues associated with that. As I said, they argue this and they decided that this is the world that they want. Okay. The question is, that's lovely paperwork. Okay. How to make it happen, because it requires transformative action. Because all of the things we have discussed so far about politics and who is in charge and ignoring the public and the private sector and so forth are the underlying issues that make it difficult for that to happen. So we have to change the way that that we think, and the transformative change can be brought about by focusing on certain leverage points, um, and the future trajectories. The way people think is based on previous experience, the past, they learn certain things, and based on the projections of what might happen in the future, they make sacrifices now for things that could happen in the future. That's how people normally think. So one of the things
Yeah.
that brought up earlier is trying to have an alternative vision. Some of those key points were actually made already of people collaborating together, um, you know, is one of the things, as the public-private sector partnership, and having alternative visions of a good life. Because most of what people think at the moment is a good life is dependent on having money. Okay, maybe a good life is dependent on spending more time with family and friends. Okay, to think a little bit
And
differently.
John, as you speak about that, from where I am sitting, I honestly haven't seen, the Caribbean, even through individual countries or as CARICOM, really spend any significant amount of time addressing this. Because, and you could just take something as simple as, okay, so we have a COVID-19 pandemic now. And I am not seeing anything being put forward to say, okay, we're dealing with this now. We're seeing the effects of it. We've seen the drain on people and their mental health, on their money, on the economy. What are we going to do if we have something similar 5, 10 years from now? And I'm not even seeing that conversation anywhere. And I think in my mind, that's what sustainable development is about. It's seeing where you are now and trying to prepare for down the road, whatever the sphere may be, whether it's the economy,
yeah.
whether it's the environment, whether it's human resource.
Yes, that's exactly the point. So there are 17 sustainable development goals, quite a lot. And there has to be some trade-offs between them. They're not individual sustainable development goals, it's a group. And consequently, you have to balance them off, and there might be some trade-offs where pursuing one sustainable development goal might be at the expense of another and so forth. So the trade-offs is what is supposed to bring everybody together to think through this and to decide on how they're going to balance these things up. But that kind of depth of thinking does not seem to be going on in the region. And COVID-19 has made it worse, in fact.
And you thought it would have been a catalyst for change. You thought people would
well,
have said, listen,
yes,
look at where we are and what we have to do.
Yes, I think it is an opportunity. Given COVID-19, here is the opportunity during this COVID-19 pandemic. It's a time-limited opportunity to restart along a transformative pathway. All of the things we've been talking about are not happening and so forth. We learned something out of COVID-19. This is not the first pandemic, okay? You know that there was Spanish flu in the 1918s or something, and people were wearing masks and stuff like this. So it's not the first time that this has happened. But it is an opportunity for us to rethink. Life is short, and there are so many things that you do to work together to advance the region and the countries and so forth in a collaborative and cooperative way, as we keep bringing the same thing up over and over again. And here is the chance. Here is the chance now with COVID-19 to see if we could make this happen. Take it as an opportunity and turn it around. Turn around the thinking. I'll hand over to the other.
All right, Justin and Anthony, let's talk about the economic sustainable development, because I think that sustainable development is that thing that you look at different areas of your existence. So let's talk about economic sustainable development across the Caribbean, where we are and what we need to do. And I'll start with Justin, because you're part of the CDB. Let's talk about, what's in place what are we even aware of and where we need to go?
Thanks, Natalie. Well, I used to be a part of the CDB, not anymore.
Right.
But the thing about it, with respect to about 10 years ago, I used to work in consultancy, advising oil and gas and mining companies around the world. And I had the unenviable task of trying to advise them around climate change and the economics of that. And back then, I simply used to go into them and say, do you know that much of your much of your assets are going to be stranded? So a lot of this wealth that you think that you have, you're not going to be able to bring it out of the ground because we have to deal with climate change. So all this oil reserves that you have, you're never going to be able to extract all of that. So don't so stop counting it on your balance sheet. I can now flip that to the Caribbean and say, do my Caribbean brothers and sisters understand that much of the assets that they have on their coast are probably going to be stranded because of climate change? And so the tourism model that we have now, which is quite dependent on coastal tourism, if we're going to have sea level rise from climate change, and so what's going to happen to many of those assets with hotels that are on the coast, for example, where in Jamaica, I know some insurance companies have stopped even insuring some of those properties. But more importantly, what do I have to do in order to think long term? What are the building codes that are required to ensure that if I'm going to live in a vulnerable part of the world as a result of climate change, what are the things that I need to do now to prepare for any sort of event that happens? And so, Natalie, I think one of the major things we have to do here is to flip the conversation and start speaking about what do I need to do to become resilient at the individual level, at the household level, at the community level, at the organizational level, at the company level, and of course at the national level. And let's work together to
And
see
that
how we
takes
can
us
do
back
that.
to leadership. That takes us back to leadership, because to address that and to get each person invested in his or her own future means that we need people who can, make us understand the importance, how critical this is for us to do. And that, it to me, is absent as well.
And I think if I just say one thing here before the others come in, it means that we have to reorient our education curriculum. We have to reorient it towards our lived reality right now. What are the things that are important for us in the Caribbean? Well, we need to ensure that we have much more entrepreneurs coming into the labor market. We don't necessarily want to have employees. We want people to start their businesses, but we also want people to be aware of the vulnerabilities that they have around them, so that they can build that personal resilience as well. Like I mentioned to you 2 weeks ago, when I suffered from the ashfall from the volcano, I told myself my resilience comes from being prepared. I was not prepared for that. If I had known, I would have been prepared. And so the education curriculum has to constantly reinforce this, that you need to be prepared. This is the neighborhood that we live in. We're vulnerable. And so we have to manage our vulnerabilities to turn those into resilience. And then, you know what, Natalie? Once we master that, we could start selling that to around the world. We could be the sellers of resilience to anywhere in the world, because we know how to build resilience.
And you know
So
what?
so
I
that
think we already do that. I honestly think we already do that, just not in a systematic way, because honestly, I don't know anybody who's more resilient than us as a Caribbean people. And those on the outside, it's one of the things they talk about us, they mention about us a lot, how resilient we are. But the thing is that it's not systematic, it's individual. It's not as a country, it's not as a people, it's individual. But and because we're so good at it, it gets outside, it translates into the Caribbean being resilient. So maybe if we just recognize what we have, so that we can package it differently, that we can get buy-in from everybody instead of just at the individual level, we might get there. Anthony?
Yeah, you know, I would say this, the 17 sustainability goals, I think to John's point, you can't just surrender one or two, because you need that entire sort of ecosystem of stuff to be able to build that ultimate sustainable world. But not everybody can work on all 17 at the same time. So there's a level of prioritization. When I look at some of our ESG work, I'm able to identify, okay, this one is 5, this is 7, this is 12, this is whatnot. And we're able to integrate it in there and tick it and tie it to what we are up to. I woke up this morning and recognized that I had this chat and this conversation, I was quite intrigued by it, because it's something that I think how do we chart a way forward is what keeps me up at night. I took over leadership of our organization January 1st, 2020, and I was like, cool, this is nice, we could settle in this thing. And then March hit, and like we all got put in a washing machine and a dryer on non-stop cycle, and I think we've been in there since. But this morning, the front page of the Business Guardian talks about growing bananas, right? I think they said the country going to a banana republic. I mean, they making making light of it, but talking about creating an agro economy. But we cannot lose, and this is a sustainability conversation. I think, look, sustainability as technology, being prepared for all the various climatic conditions. In St. Kitts, they're talking about taking all the electricity lines and putting them underground so that when these hurricanes pass through, like in Florida or what have you, look, they just sweep the street and wash the yard or whatever, and they back up and running the next day. In the Caribbean, we take a serious lash. But coming back to the banana point, we are net consumers of foreign exchange. All of our technology, right, is imported. The cars we drive, the computer that I'm talking to you on, our phones, everything, the machinery with which we produce, even the stuff that we manufacture, the machinery to manufacture that is all imported too. And we are at a fundamental and an unsustainable mismatch in foreign exchange needs and be able to trade. And I argued this, and it was just funny. I argued this with my international trade professor when I was studying economics. I said, we're talking about balance of payments, and I was learning about international trade. I said, but the amount of bananas I have to sell you to be able to buy a car, to trade a car with you, I mean, is a complete mismatch. I mean, a whole farm is going to take months to grow and whatnot to be, but
Yeah.
So when you look at it as a region, and we're under pressure by these international, because the offshore sector has been a pretty thriving area, and all the global watchdogs are looking at us in the region, and rightly or wrongly so, and saying, you can't do that. So our tourism is there, some of our exports, but how do we get to a point? Because to me, that's where the sustainability comes in.
So we're not competitive enough based on what we put out. So is it that we need to rethink our manufacturing sector, just the kind of things that we get involved in?
I just think we need a lot more of it. And essentially, you look at a blockbuster movie, right? You could take local currency and produce a film and generate a Caribbean film. These films go on, they become blockbusters and whatnot, 300 million US on the opening night and all this kind of thing. I mean, so what's to stop us? We have this vibe and this energy that is so attractive. Where is our film industry? Where's our music industry? How do we take those arts and turn it into more and more business? How do we create those entrepreneurs who can come in and, I don't know, create the next mega app in the region and be able to drive and bring what is needed into the region? That is what I think we need to be retooling our education system to do. There are only so many engineers that we could hire. There are only so many plants we're going to have. There's only so much road we're going to build. So how do we retool? And this is where I think our education comes in, and it comes down to a
so we need to look more
plan.
at the services sector. So we probably have to look more at
all of it.
Service.
I think we need to look at all of it, Natalee, and we need to look at it within the context of sustainability. I mean, generationally, we got to look at where money is gone. Money is gone in, heavy industrial stuff. Globally, it's gone into arms and munitions and stuff that really you think, okay, if we're talking about sustainability, do we need to be buying all of these bombs and planes and all this kind of stuff? How do we take capital and in a disciplined global way, and we are part of that global village, deploy it in sustainable industries and sustainable projects that continue to, because it has to generate economy, it has to generate wealth. Wealth is what's going to keep the world ticking. People need jobs, people need income to be able to trade. what that looks like may evolve. But I think that's that for me is where we need to contextualize ourselves.
I definitely take that point because you're right. If I'm going to have to do bananas, for example, or even peppers, the amount I'm going to have to put out to compare to one film, then, for example, or even one phone, I am at a disadvantage
Well, yeah.
already. So
Well, we need it
yeah, we
all.
really have to.
We need it all. We
Mhm.
need it all. We need it all.
Natalie, could I
Gentlemen,
also
we do
say,
have some questions. Go ahead,
I just,
Justin. Sorry.
I also want to say that how we prioritize our education budget has to be re-examined. So take, for example, the money that we're spending at tertiary level education. Much more of that money needs to be going into postgraduate and to research and development. Right now, we're spending a lot of money on undergraduate degrees. People can go in and get a degree, but a lot of that money needs to go more into R&D, so that John and his students can do well. John,
So
I'm
then,
assuming you're still at UWI.
Justin, let me ask you:
Yes,
Did
to
this
do
did this
more R&D.
government make a wrong? Did this government make a wrong move then by cutting our gate, especially for postgraduate studies, because that's the direction it has gone in? It has made cuts to gate, and one of those cuts is for postgraduate studies. So was that a wrong move?
I absolutely think that that was an incorrect move. It was a bit short-sighted. I think that all economies that are on the cutting edge right now, you would look at them. You look as a percentage of GDP, how much they're spending on research and development. It's about maybe 3 to 5%, let's say. Our expenditure is way less than 1% on R&D. And that is throughout the Caribbean. That is insufficient if you want to have a cutting-edge economy. And so a lot of R&D spend has to come from the public sector support. Then Anthony with his firm will start doing more as well. He would start to be able to use those ideas coming out of UWI to now build new industry, for example, based on our lived reality. But John is the expert. Let's give John and his students the money to start building out our economy, giving us ideas. Not all of the ideas we will use, but a substantial proportion of them we will. And so I think that is the thing that we have to look at. How we reprioritize our education expenditure is going to be critical at this point in time.
Gentlemen, we do have some questions from online and some comments. One, Texas says, whether CARICOM countries could be better off together. I think I'm missing a part of that. Hold on. All right, let me just go to Jeanette says, don't sell bananas, sell sargassum, sell breadfruit, sell items that bring about sustainability. And Annalee says, governments in the Caribbean are not supporting the arts. There isn't an infrastructure to sustain the arts sector in practical ways. What do you all say about that?
Can I just respond to that? Because listen, in the Caribbean, we have really clever people, eh? Let me just take the example of the sargassum. You know, there was a challenge from IDB, okay, for people to come up with ideas around the region. And one of those was from St. Lucia, in which somebody created making sargassum into fertilizer, okay? And they employed 20 persons. So instead of sargassum being a problem on the beaches, they're collecting it. This is a resource that you can convert into something that you could sell. And they're sending that to India, Canada, all kind of thing, and they're employing 20 persons. There was a young man in his 20s, in fact. In Barbados, they're turning sargassum into soap bars, cosmetics, which they're selling. In Trinidad and Tobago, some really clever students in the University of the West Indies have discovered how to create plastic out of sargassum. That's amazing as well, that you can create plastic out of sargassum. So we're not short of smart people in the region, in fact.
And that's why I'm saying the resilience is at an individual level, but we don't have it collectively, because you'd want to believe that when people come up with these ideas and are finding ways to get rid of something that could have harmed us, that the government would step in and create that enabling environment for them so that they can have the kind of investment they need to do what they're supposed to. So that the government itself will benefit, because if the beaches are free of sargassum weed, then that's more leeway for your tourism and for your tourists, for your sector.
Yes, well, that's exactly the problem. We haven't created the environment to support people who have innovative ideas. I happen to be the director of a Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, is what it's called, because we're trying to change the model. I'm trying to see if we could convince the government to put in the resources. In the case of Trinidad and Tobago, they even had an economic development advisory board who suggested that you should divert the income and so forth to supporting people who have ideas to turn into business and employ other persons and so forth, rather than looking for a job, because that's not working, especially in the current circumstances. But somehow or the other, that hasn't taken political traction. In a situation where we are not short of smart people who come up with clever ideas throughout the region, who can be turned into business and start a business and employ other persons and make money, rather than sending out your CV to try and get a job in the ministry, for example, which is not working, in fact. So how do we create that environment?
But John, you know what? The thing about it is that I think what you just raised brings me back to Justin's point about communication, because there is a program, I think it is through NIDCO, where you have minding your own business, where they actually, the ministry, one of those ministries, invest in young people who are starting out their business. They give them capital. But if people don't know that these things exist and they don't know how to access them, then it seems as if it's just not there.
Yes, that the communication issue, the media issue is one of our problems, where I guess when you have a program like that, you have to involve people from the media who will know how to put things on Facebook, Instagram. You know, a lot of young people are on those social media and really you may not be reading the newspapers and stuff like this. So you have to use that whole range of communication, methods of communication to get people to, you know, and in the current situation, maybe you should be able to fill in the form online and not have to go in person and line up. Yeah.
Let's go to one more of our comments, and this one is it from YouTube? It says, in digitization, the democratization of money, when we look at the blockchain and crypto, and there are ways to integrate that now. Did we not just talk about gender inequality second? I am not following Jeanette's comment. In digitization, the democratization of money, when we, I'm sorry, Jeanette, I'm not following it. There aren't complete sentences, so it's kind of throwing me off. But she says, and how economically women suffer, how will the digitization of money prevent harm or hinder that? Yeah, how will the digitization of money prevent harm or hinder women economically from suffering economically?
Well,
Anyone?
one thing I could say about when you digitalize currency, so for example, if you're now dealing only in digital transactions, it is a great way to reduce crime, let's say. So I can't speak specifically to gender. So if, for example, all transactions are done digitally, then you can trace those transactions throughout and you know who is doing what. So you could imagine then, Natalie, things like corruption would actually fall, because now people can't be walking around with big bags of money and paying off persons, for example. So that's one thing. With respect to digitalization and gender, I would imagine that now, if, for example, we start using e-wallets, for example, for the holding of your electronic currencies, for example, it can easily make women a lot more empowered. But at this point in time, women can now get bank accounts, for example. But if, for example, it's going to be quite easy for us to now make transactions much more easily so that we can get money to women in a lot easier way rather than without significant transaction costs. Maybe in some way that could help gender equality, but it's an area that I have to say I have not put much attention to. But when it comes to digitalization and crime, I know that there are significant benefits for it there.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Winsome says, the question is not whether federations struggle, but whether CARICOM countries could be better off together. Leadership must relinquish some control. They have so far not wanted to do so. I agree with Winsome. Gentlemen, thoughts?
Well, we've spoken about this before, thinking that that is one of the underlying problems of not working together. The silos is an inherent underlying problem. When the whole region would do
Yeah.
better if it collaborated and did the trade-offs. Um, as Anthony had indicated earlier, even among the sustainable development goals, you can't be done in silos, and you have to talk between them and clusters and trade off certain issues where one might affect the other and so forth. But that is part of the underlying cultural issue in the region of not doing that to advance the whole region.
Yeah.
Right. And Justin, you made a point earlier about, looking at the education and making changes to the educational model. And you spoke about investing more into postgraduate studies. But what else do we need to change with the educational model? Because for me, the curriculum is a hot, hot, hot mess. We're in a digital age and we're in a technological age, but we don't teach networking. We don't teach critical thinking. We don't teach any of the things, cryptocurrency even, how to address the stock market, all of these things that are moving the world economy, we seem to have a hands-off approach on.
Yeah. Well, Natalie, I think we have to look at the education from the moment a child is born. So one thing is that we need to make sure that parents, both men and women, be involved with the raising of their children, but they're also able to have enough parental leave to take that child through the first few months, if not a year of its life. Then, of course, I think we have to provide significant amount of early childhood education because we all know in the first 2 years of life, going in maybe to the first 10 years, those are the critical times when a human being learns. And if you don't get that right,
Yeah.
it's very difficult to correct that later on. But with respect to curriculum, I think that digitalization has to be mainstream. We have to make sure that we understand that when we're teaching, that as Anthony says, we want to become the builders of technology now. That's how we have to start thinking about it. So we also have to mainstream as well entrepreneurship. That sort of thinking must be
Yeah.
in a young person's mind from very early on, that, you know what, when I finish with school, I want to think about opening up my own business. And that has to be critical. And I think the other things that we have to think about, and this is where John's so critical, his work that he's doing, is on understanding the environment that we live in. We live in a very terrible neighborhood where we're visited by these hurricanes that we give names every year. We have to understand that we have to prepare for that and understand how to live with that and to be resilient. So I think we need to change our curriculum based on our lived reality rather than what we have been doing previously. I mean, I should not have been here in Barbados and, as a 40-something-year-old, not known enough about La Soufri. That should have been taught to me when
Yeah.
I was, you don't think so? And maybe it is down to me that I should have learned
Yeah.
about it as
No,
an
I
individual,
fully agree.
but I should have known
A
known
lot of
about
us
it.
don't even
Uh,
know how to pronounce it
you know
Yeah,
because
what?
we've never
Nobody
heard anything
expected.
about it before this eruption.
Look, the winds,
exactly.
the winds usually blow the other way. It just happened at that time the wind blew. So it's so I guess the stars lining up, and you just happen to be, as they say, wrong place, bad time, or what have
Right,
you.
right.
Um,
Yeah.
Natalie, I just want
All
to
right.
say
Let me.
something. I heard I
Yeah.
heard earlier in the discussion. We use the and we need to be careful here because I don't think we suffer from bad leadership. I think we
Mm.
suffer from maybe more disjointed leadership and finding and ensuring an evolutionary way that the leaders that we entrust to lead us are actually, within having the right conversation and the conversations within the context of regionalization and sustainability. And it's on that basis, and we have an obligation, to ensure that that's the type of leadership that we seek out. If we seek out tribal leadership, we'll continue with more tribalism. We
Well,
have
and that's the point.
insufficient,
We have. I
insufficient
agree
regional
with you. I don't think
institutions
it's
that
that we
unite
don't.
us.
I don't think it's that we don't have leaders, but the thing is, maybe most of them are just charismatic instead of being transformational or transitional. Or maybe they're autocratic. It's the kind of leadership that we have in the Caribbean region and the kind of people that we are. How well is that kind of leadership serving us? And I think that's where you and I probably part ways because I'm not seeing it serving us well. in terms of our growth, as you said, how long it is taking us as CARICOM to even get from point A to point B. From the time Eric Eustace Williams talked about the Federation and said, 1 from 10 leaves not, to now, how much growth have we seen within the region as a region, which means through CARICOM, through CSME? It's extremely limited. We can't even agree on one page about how much people should be moving through the region. We can't even agree on the movement of labor.
Well,
Look, I think there's been a lot of evolution. I think potentially it's subjective if there's enough. Is there more that could be done? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we need to hold our leaders accountable and give them the support, recognizing that the challenge is not an easy one. I mean, look at the European Union, they're struggling. Even the United States, they're struggling. They can't agree on which state would have what gun law, what cannabis law, who could abort, who can't abort. So it's not a simple, it's not a simple item. Have we made progress? Yes. Have we made enough? Subject to opinion. Subject to opinion. Is there more that we can do?
No,
Absolutely.
we've not made enough.
Well, you go there, Natalee, and I hear you.
Well,
Natalee, there's more we
this
need to do.
This is where I think the whole contract between society and government has to change, because the whole incentive and structure around when you elect someone into office, they really have no reason to be accountable to you until the next election comes around. That has to change. If I am disgruntled as a citizen, I have no right to recall. I have no right to recall. So what I'm saying is that has to change, so that you have to have the incentive and structure. So I think we need to think about constitutional reform around this, so that when people are elected, they are automatically accountable for us every day, and those accountability mechanisms are put in there. It has to be like how, for example, some companies.
Well, how do we do that? Do we have to move from a first past the post system? Is it the electoral process itself that we have to change?
I think we need to wrap
Natalee,
up.
I heard Justin say it earlier, and I'm not sure how we achieve that. Some entity needs to sit down and rewrite for public scrutiny and for public sort of input. And this is where, and I'm conscious that we're speaking at a literary festival, but this is where the writers and the people with that kind of imagination, somebody needs to sit down and reimagine what that social contract looks like. So we're not speaking to it, but let's create it and let's debate it. Let it become a regional debate. What is it that we expect or don't expect? And and empower some entity to sort of rewrite that and represent it to the citizenry, and then we find a way to sort of live into it.
I don't think that's so difficult, because we do have the talent, we do have the creativity, we have the people, and it goes back to the leadership that we have there.
Let's task our university with it. The intellectuals, they're the ones best positioned. Mm-hmm. God knows if I even attempt to go there, I don't have the experience or the expertise to do it. But it can't emerge from an organization. It needs to emerge from academia and literature, I would say. So,
all right, one message that we've gotten, it says island gross Caribbean agricultural production needs to employ advanced ag tech to grow it locally, offset food imports, and reduce the forex flow that way.
Yeah. Who did that come from?
That came from Natalee Davis. No,
Natalee,
sorry.
Natalee,
no, it says from Alana.
Natalee, we've been told we need to wrap up. Past time.
Okay,
right. We need to wrap up now.
Sorry, let me just see.
Very good.
Let me just read the other messages that we have, then we do that. It says, Visio Media from YouTube, we could easily have a Silicon Valley situation in various islands. There is a business case for it since digital is the way forward in many industries. We have the talent. All right, and we do have to go, but final words from each of you.
Well, in resilience building, I think is the quite critical component, and collaboration between public, private sector, and and business as well, going forward, to try and make that happen.
Anthony?
I'll pause here. I think I really appreciated this opportunity to be amongst such a proficient team and the expertise. I'm renewed in my confidence in what's possible as a region, and I thank you for permitting me this and affording me this opportunity.
You're most welcome. And Justin.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll just re-emphasize what I said before. I think we need that new contract between government and the people. We need governments to be facilitators and just simply get out of the way, not trying to run businesses themselves. And we have to think about the region as a single economic space. You know, we spoke about the Eastern Caribbean. Why not the rest of us in CARICOM join the Eastern Caribbean? You know, it's probably the most successful regional entity in the world, par none. We have it right here in the Caribbean. Let's try and build on that.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you so much, Anthony Sabga, director of the largest conglomerate in the region, Professor John Agard, who is an environmentalist and a part of the UN Sustainable Development
Goal Team. Yeah.
Right. Thank you so much. And of course, Dr. Justin Ram, who is an economist and of course, advisor to regional governments on their economy. So gentlemen, thank you all so much for participating in the 11th edition of the NGC Bocas Lit Fest, where we look at literary work. You know, it's a literary arts development organization, but we just wanted to bring that big idea, the way forward post-COVID-19, and to just see where the region needs to go. And I think your input has definitely been tremendous. And if anybody listened to this, they'd have some ideas about what we need to do going forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you all. Have the great rest of your day.
Yes, thank you, Anthony.